When park rangers finally lowered themselves into the dark hollow, it wasn't a cry that greeted them, it was the stench of sickness. Seasoned professionals, men hardened by decades in the wilderness, collapsed where they stood. What lay hidden at the base of that forgotten ravine in the Cascade Mountains defied every boundary of the human mind. It was something that should not exist, something that mocked the natural order. Two bodies were fused together in a way no living being was ever meant to be. Authorities would later name it the Forest Surgeon case, but its roots stretched back 28 years, to a quiet July morning when two college students set out with nothing more than a weekend escape in mind. This is a story that forces us to confront an unsettling truth: how fragile the wall is between order and chaos, between a human face and something far darker beneath it. Ask yourself, can evil wear an ordinary smile? And how far should truth be pursued in the name of justice, even when the guilty no longer breathe? In the early 1990s, Bellingham, Washington, felt like a place untouched by such questions. A small university town resting between the calm waters of Bellingham Bay and the towering Cascade Range, it moved at a gentle, predictable pace. Summers there carried the perfume of blooming rhododendrons. Evenings were measured by the bells of the old Methodist church on Holly Street, ringing over streets where familiarity replaced fear. Shop owners knew their customers by habit and preference. The bookseller on Bay Street could place the right novel into anyone's hands. Doors were left unlocked. Children stayed out past sunset. Visitors arrived seeking mountains, forests, and the quiet beauty of the Pacific Northwest. Emily Thompson and Jennifer Riley embodied everything the town admired in its youth. Emily was 19, a biology student at Western Washington University, her dreams fixed on becoming a veterinarian. Small and soft-spoken, with fiery red curls, she carried a battered sketchbook filled with drawings of alpine plants. Her parents owned a modest pharmacy on Meridian Street, where Emily often helped after class, patiently guiding elderly customers through their prescriptions. Jennifer Riley, a year older, studied English literature and worked evenings at the Whatcom County Library. Tall and composed, her long blonde hair usually braided neatly down her back, she was thoughtful where Emily was energetic. They met during their first year of college and quickly became inseparable, two opposite rhythms moving in perfect harmony. July of 1995 arrived wrapped in heat. Temperatures in the valley soared to 95 degrees. And like so many others, the young people of Bellingham longed for the cool breath of the mountains. Emily and Jennifer had planned their hike for weeks. They chose Hayes Lake Pass in Mount Baker, Snoqualmie National Forest, a well-known route praised for its beauty and solitude. The trail wasn't labeled dangerous, but it demanded stamina and navigation skills. They prepared carefully, buying supplies at the REI on Sunset Drive, checking compasses and maps, packing a tent and sleeping bags. July 21st dawned clear and bright. At 6 a.m, they met in the Bear Shopping Center parking lot, excitement spilling into every word. Emily's mother walked her to the car, offering one last reminder: extra flashlight batteries, nightly phone calls. Emily laughed, hugged her tightly, and promised caution. It was the final peaceful smile her mother would ever see. At 7:03 a.m, Jennifer's red 1992 Jeep Cherokee pulled away, neighbors watching as it turned onto Highway 20 and disappeared east toward the mountains. 2 hours later, they reached Glacier, the final outpost before the wilderness. Home to barely 200 residents, loggers, rangers, and a handful of innkeepers, it was a place where strangers were noticed. Bob McKenzie, owner of the town's only gas station and general store, later recalled the two cheerful young women stopping by that morning. They filled the tank, bought water and energy bars, and asked about the weather. He told them sunshine was expected, though storms might roll in the following evening. They thanked him, parked the Jeep in the tourist lot, and headed for the trailhead. Mackenzie watched until the forest swallowed them whole. He was the last person to see Emily Thompson and Jennifer Riley alive. Their first day unfolded exactly as planned. That evening, around 8 p.m, Emily called her mother from a pay phone at a ranger station 6 miles from the trailhead. She said they'd covered 10 miles, pitched their tent near a stream, and everything was fine. Her voice was clear. Happy. She promised to call again the next night from farther along the route. Mrs. Thompson slept peacefully, unaware that she had just heard her daughter's voice for the final time. The next day, July 22nd, carried a quiet tension. By noon, no calls had come. By 3 o'clock, when the girls were expected at Hayes Creek Ranger Station, there was still nothing. At 6, concern turned to fear. And by 9 that night, the mountains had gone completely silent. By 9 that night, fear overpowered patience, and the parents contacted law enforcement. The Whatcom County Sheriff's deputy on duty, Dave Harrison, recorded the missing persons report with little urgency. He tried to calm them, explaining that delays in the mountains were common, that hikers often lost their bearings or chose to camp unexpectedly. His advice was simple: wait until morning. Morning came. Nothing changed. On July 23, as the silence stretched on, concern hardened into certainty. Something was wrong. By midday, the first search effort was authorized. At 2 p.m., 15 National Park Service rescuers, joined by local mountain rescue volunteers, moved out along the Hayes Lake route. Veteran rangers led the way, men who knew these trails like scripture, alongside dog handlers whose companions followed scents invisible to the human eye. They began where certainty ended, the ranger station from which Emily had made her final call. Step by step, the teams advanced, scrutinizing every turn in the path, every ledge, every shadowed drop. The mountains offered no answers until evening. Near the base of the pass, in a quiet clearing framed by fir and pine, they found the Jeep. A red Cherokee. Parked carefully. Locked. Untouched. No broken glass. No forced entry. But beside the trail, placed with unsettling intention, lay 2 backpacks, one green, one blue. The same ones Emily and Jennifer had carried. They were aligned neatly, as if their owners had simply stepped away. Inside was everything: tent, sleeping bags, food, spare clothes, compasses, maps, identification, cash, wallets included. Everything was there except the girls. In that instant, the search transformed. This was no longer a matter of hikers running late. Something abrupt had intervened. Yet the ground told no story of violence. No blood. No torn fabric. No scattered belongings. The packs looked set down, not dropped. The search perimeter widened, extending miles in every direction through forest and ravine. Coast Guard helicopters swept overhead with thermal cameras. Volunteers poured in, locals, students from the university, strangers driven by shared dread. For days and nights, hundreds of voices echoed through the mountains, calling Emily and Jennifer's names into the darkness, probing every crevice with light. By the end of July, the truth could no longer be avoided. These were not lost tourists. Whatcom County Police officially opened a criminal investigation into a disappearance under suspicious circumstances. The case was assigned to Detective Michael Stevens, a seasoned investigator with 25 years behind him. Tall, lean, graying at the temples, his stare carried the weight of long familiarity with human darkness. Stevens ordered a full reconstruction, every witness questioned, every scrap of evidence catalogued, every person known to be in the area identified. The net tightened quickly. The first name to surface was Ray Dalton, a local guide who offered escort services on mountain trails. 49 years old, unkempt, jittery, Dalton lived alone in a weathered trailer outside Glacier and kept to himself. Years earlier, he'd been accused of harassing a tourist, though the case collapsed for lack of proof. When questioned this time, his behavior raised alarms. He fumbled his words, refused eye contact, and changed his account repeatedly when asked where he'd been on July 21 and 22. His trailer was searched twice. Inside were photographs of young female hikers and newspaper clippings about missing persons, but nothing that could directly tie him to Emily and Jennifer. Another figure soon emerged. Travis Coleman. 37. Former military. Employed as a caretaker at a mountain ranger station. Physically imposing, arms marked with tattoos, known locally for heavy drinking. Multiple witnesses claimed they'd seen his truck near Hayes Lake Pass on July 22, though Coleman denied ever being there. A search of his residence uncovered women's jewelry, 2 rings and a silver bracelet. Coleman offered no clear explanation for how they came into his possession. The mountains remained silent. But the shadows around this case were beginning to take shape. Forensic testing eventually confirmed that none of the recovered jewelry belonged to Emily or Jennifer. With nothing solid to hold him, Coleman remained in custody for 2 weeks before being released. Evidence was thin. Leads dried up. Time moved on. As weeks turned into months, the investigation lost momentum. By the autumn of 1995, the official search was suspended. Detective Stevens, drained by endless nights chasing fragments that led nowhere, was forced to face the truth. He had reached the limits of what could be found. The mountains had taken 2 young women and offered nothing in return. Their families refused to surrender to silence. They hired private investigators, sought answers from psychics, and filled newspapers across the Pacific Northwest with pleas and photographs. Each time human remains were discovered in the wilderness, hope and terror arrived together, only to dissolve again when the identities proved unrelated. Slowly, life in Bellingham resumed its familiar rhythm, but something vital had been broken. The disappearance left a scar no routine could erase. Western Washington University installed a memorial plaque bearing Emily and Jennifer's names. They became a reminder, a warning, a symbol of how easily tragedy can reach those who believe themselves safe in nature's beauty. Yet the true threat had never been the forest. It was human. 3 years passed. Long enough for raw grief to dull into a constant, quiet pain. Long enough for expectation to thin into resignation. By 1998, the case of Emily Thompson and Jennifer Riley was officially declared cold. The files were boxed and shelved deep within the Whatcom County Sheriff's archives. Detective Stevens retired not long after, carrying with him a sense of unfinished duty that never loosened its grip. And then, as it so often does, the truth surfaced without warning, and in a form far more horrifying than anyone imagined. In the fall of 1998, 4 hunters from the town of Linden headed into the mountains for deer season. Among them was Jack Morrison, a 54-year-old high school teacher who had hunted these ranges for 3 decades. He was joined by his son-in-law and 2 longtime friends. Their chosen route cut through an abandoned stretch known locally as Dead Man Fest Gulch, a place even seasoned outdoorsmen tended to avoid. The gorge carried a reputation. Locals spoke of bears, strange sounds after dark, and an unspoken rule: don't linger there. Morrison dismissed the stories as folklore. On October 7, around mid-afternoon, the group began descending a steep slope tangled with brush and low fir trees when Morrison's aging Labrador, Buck, stopped abruptly. The dog stiffened, barking toward a single patch of ground. When the men approached, they noticed what first appeared to be a shallow depression. A trick of the terrain. But as Morrison looked closer, unease set in. This was no natural hollow. It was a pit, square, deliberate, roughly 7 feet across and plunging nearly 10 feet down. Old branches and moss lay scattered across the top, remnants of a failed attempt at concealment. Weather and time had undone the disguise. Morrison raised his flashlight and aimed it downward. What he saw caused his body to betray him. He staggered back, clutching a tree to keep from collapsing. At the bottom lay what had once been people. 2 bodies. Partially preserved. Dust-covered. Layered with leaves. But it was not decay that froze his breath, it was the way they were bound together. Even through shock, Morrison understood that he was witnessing something profoundly wrong. Something the mind resists acknowledging. Police reached Dead Man's Gulch 3 hours after his call. The site was sealed immediately. By nightfall, forensic teams, medical examiners, and photographers filled the ravine. Recovering the remains took hours. Every movement was careful. Every inch mattered. When the bodies were finally lifted from the earth and transported to the Whatcom County Morgue in Bellingham, the investigation entered its darkest chapter. Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Richard Parker, 3 decades into a career defined by human cruelty, would later admit that this case unsettled him in a way few ever had. The preliminary examination revealed a truth so disturbing that even experience offered no shield. Examination confirmed that both sets of remains belonged to young Caucasian women. The level of preservation told its own story. Cold air and dryness within the gorge had slowed decay, placing the time of death at roughly 3 years earlier. This unusual condition allowed specialists to work with disturbing clarity. Identification took 2 days. Dental records aligned. DNA removed all doubt. They were Emily Thompson and Jennifer Riley. The missing girls had been found, but not returned. Dr. Parker assembled a report that would later be remembered as one of the most harrowing documents in Washington state forensic history. The findings revealed that death had not come swiftly. Both victims were lowered into the pit alive, restrained, unable to escape. They perished slowly, through dehydration and exposure, over the course of several days. Yet even that was not the deepest horror. Before death, deliberate acts had been carried out upon them. According to experts, the individual responsible possessed fundamental medical knowledge and practical surgical ability. While the victims were still alive, invasive procedures were performed. Crude, improvised, yet unmistakably intentional. Emily Thompson's head had been surgically attached to Jennifer Riley's body in a way that defied comprehension. The work was done under primitive conditions, but with tools and methods consistent with medical practice. Sutures were used, identified through analysis as visceral medical thread. Injection marks were present on both bodies. Investigators believed local anesthetics had been administered, though insufficient to eliminate pain. The procedure likely took hours and may have been carried out in the ravine itself or somewhere nearby. The FBI's behavioral analysis team in Seattle constructed a psychological profile. Their conclusion was clear. This was not an impulsive killer. This was someone driven by deep pathological impulses. Likely medically trained. Possibly once trusted with care. The act itself suggested not only violence, but ritualized suffering. A man who did not seek death alone, but control. The profile described a solitary, middle-aged individual, socially withdrawn, potentially with a history of mental illness or unresolved prior offenses. With this revelation, the case shifted. It was no longer about finding what happened. It was about uncovering who had been hiding in plain sight. Detective James Carroll, who assumed leadership after Stephen's retirement, assembled a dedicated unit of 10 investigators. Their first step was to exhume the past, every report, every interview, every overlooked detail from 1995. This time, the focus narrowed sharply to one question: who in the region had medical capability? The answer was unsettlingly small. Within 50 miles of Deadman's Gulch, only 14 individuals possessed formal medical training. 5 physicians. 3 nurses. 4 paramedics. 2 veterinarians. Each was scrutinized. Most were quickly eliminated by solid alibis. But one name resisted dismissal: Robert Kane. At the time of the disappearance, Kane was 59 years old. He had worked as a paramedic at a rural clinic in the town of Concrete, roughly 40 miles from the gorge. In 1994, he was dismissed under ambiguous circumstances. Shortly afterward, he withdrew from society, relocating to a secluded cabin in the woods, uncomfortably close to where the bodies were eventually discovered. Kane lived alone. He avoided people. He survived by carving wood and selling firewood to local businesses. The deeper detectives looked, the darker the pattern became. In 1992, Kane had been detained on suspicion of sexually assaulting a female tourist who became lost in the mountains and sought his help. She claimed he gave her a drink that caused her to lose consciousness. When she awoke, she noticed unexplained marks on her body. Medical examinations failed to produce definitive proof, and fearing public exposure, she declined to pursue charges. The case quietly disappeared. A year later, Kane was formally charged with stealing medications and medical instruments from the clinic where he worked. Following the trial, he lost his job and his paramedic license. Records revealed more. During the 1980s, Kane had frequent access to the clinic's surgical unit and regularly assisted in procedures. His hands were trained. His knowledge was sufficient. And among the materials seized from him in 1993 were visceral sutures, the same type used on Emily and Jennifer. The line between healer and destroyer had never been thin. It had only been hidden. Detective Carroll ordered Kane located immediately, but the command arrived too late to matter. Robert Kane had died months earlier. On March 16, 1997, a heart attack ended his life inside the isolated cabin where he lived alone. His body was discovered days later by a lumberjack who had come to warn him about upcoming logging work in the area. The medical examiner concluded Kane had been dead for several days before anyone knew. He was buried quietly in a rural cemetery. No mourners. No ceremony. No name spoken over his grave. In a cruel twist of fate, the man believed responsible for the atrocity had escaped earthly judgment by dying before investigators could formally confront him. What remained was the place he left behind. Detectives searched the decaying cabin, partially collapsed, swallowed by forest growth, and what they uncovered chilled even seasoned investigators. Improvised surgical tools lay scattered among rusted equipment. Glass jars filled with formaldehyde held fragments of preserved tissue, their origins undocumented. Notebooks covered in anatomical drawings described procedures in obsessive detail, notes no healthy mind would record. One entry stopped them cold. Dated July 23, 1995. Experiment 7. 2 subjects. Connection successful. Observation, 72 hours. Handwriting experts confirmed the writing belonged to Kane. DNA testing removed any lingering doubt. Biological traces recovered from the cabin, hair, blood, skin, matched Emily Thompson and Jennifer Riley. The evidence was overwhelming. Then came the photographs. Hidden beneath loose floorboards was a series of images. They showed 2 young women restrained on the filthy cabin floor. Some images captured moments so disturbing investigators refused to release details publicly. Written on the backs were dates, July 22 and July 23, 1995. The final shape of the truth emerged. On July 22, as Emily and Jennifer made their way through Hayes Lake Pass, they likely encountered Kane. Perhaps he appeared helpful. Familiar with the terrain. Maybe he offered a shortcut. A place to rest. Somewhere safe. Investigators believe he lured them to his cabin, where he incapacitated them using strong sedatives he had access to. What followed, experts estimate, lasted 2 to 3 days. After the girls were placed alive into the pit, left to die slowly from cold and thirst, Kane likely returned to the trailhead. There, he deliberately placed their backpacks beside the parked jeep. A calculated gesture. A false trail designed to confuse and delay discovery. It was not panic. It was planning. Authorities now believe Kane may not have acted only once. Over the previous 2 decades, 9 people, hikers, tourists, hunters, had vanished in the mountains of Whatcom County. Those cases were long attributed to accidents or navigational errors. After the revelation of the forest surgeon, every disappearance was reopened. The impact rippled across the Pacific Northwest. Newspapers carried the story on their front pages. Television networks interrupted regular programming. Public disbelief turned quickly to horror. Evil, it seemed, had lived quietly among them. For Emily and Jennifer's families, answers finally arrived, but at an unbearable cost. At a brief press conference, Emily's mother managed only a single sentence before breaking down. "I knew my daughter wasn't just lost," she said. "Now I know the truth, and it's tearing my heart apart." In response, Whatcom County overhauled its mountain safety protocols. Mandatory trail registration was introduced. Emergency beacons became required equipment. A dedicated hotline was established. Additional ranger stations were built along popular routes. Safeguards were strengthened, but safeguards cannot resurrect the dead. Emily Thompson and Jennifer Riley were laid to rest at Bayview Cemetery in Bellingham on October 28. Hundreds attended, family, friends, classmates, strangers united by grief. Detective Carroll stood apart from the crowd, his face unreadable. The case was technically closed. The name of the perpetrator was known. But there would be no courtroom. No verdict. No release that justice sometimes brings. Psychologists who later reviewed Kane's records concluded he suffered from a rare and extreme form of sadistic personality disorder intertwined with medical fixation. A man trained to heal, who instead chose to desecrate life. And so the story ends where it began, with a truth the chosen ones are meant to recognize: the wilderness did not claim them. A human did. To him, the human body was not sacred, it was raw material. Flesh became a medium, pain a stimulus. Specialists believe the fractures in his psyche began early, long before anyone noticed, concealed beneath a convincing performance of normal life. His role as a paramedic opened doors most people never see: access to instruments, to vulnerable bodies, to knowledge meant for healing. Over time, that access fed something twisted, something that grew darker with each passing year. When he lost his job and withdrew into isolation, restraint disappeared entirely. One question refused to rest: how many came before? Investigators pressed on, searching for links between Kane and other unresolved disappearances. The forest surrounding his cabin was combed inch by inch. Ground-penetrating radar scanned the soil for hidden truths. 2 more pits were discovered. Shaped like the first. Deliberate. Empty. Were they waiting? Or had time erased what they once held? No one could say. In December 1998, the forest surgeon case was formally closed, solved, the perpetrator identified, prosecution impossible due to the suspect's death. On paper, it was finished. In reality, it never would be. For the parents. For the city of Bellingham. For all who followed the story. It remained a reminder that evil does not always announce itself, that monstrosity can wear an ordinary face, that the distance between order and brutality is far thinner than we want to believe. At Western Washington University, new words were etched beneath Emily and Jennifer's memorial. May their story teach vigilance, compassion, and remembrance, for behind every life stands a family that loves deeply. Their parents later established a charitable foundation, supporting families of the missing and funding safety initiatives in mountainous regions. It became their way forward, transforming loss into protection for others. Dead Man's Gulch has since been closed to the public. Locals steer clear, some calling it cursed. And on still autumn nights, those who live nearby claim they hear something drifting from the ravine, sounds like a woman's quiet sobbing carried on the air. Skeptics blame wind, leaves, nocturnal birds. Others believe the mountains remember. Whatever the explanation, one truth endures. The events of July 1995 have not faded. They stand as a warning to all who enter the wilderness, and as a reminder that the gravest danger does not come from nature itself, but from those who have abandoned their humanity. If this story held your attention, remember to subscribe and enable notifications so you don't miss future investigations. In the next episode, we explore a mystery that remains unsolved to this day, the disappearance of an entire family in a quiet Seattle suburb, where a single surveillance recording captures something no one has been able to explain.